Have you ever wondered why the truth about women is so rarely spoken? Why every conversation about them either spirals into blind worship or bitter resentment? We live in a world where women are painted as either saints descended from heaven or enigmatic creatures to be feared. But what if both images are lies? What if something far more complex, human, and alive hides beneath? Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the boldest minds of the 19th century, wasn't afraid to ask the questions others dodged. He saw the world without rose-tinted glasses and noticed what most chose to ignore. His words about women shocked, outraged, but above all, forced people to think. Nietzsche didn't hate women, nor did he put them on a pedestal. He wanted to understand who they truly are, beyond the mass society forced upon them and the roles they chose to play. And his truth, like a sharp blade, cuts deep, but that's where its power lies. Have you ever wondered why love feels so perfect but always ends in disappointment? Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher they feared and hated, knew the answer. And his truth will shock you. He claimed women aren't angels or victims but masters of a game that fools us all. "I see your lies," he declared, exposing secrets no one dared to hear. What if everything you know about love is an illusion? What if women are controlling you, and you don't even suspect it? Scandals, hidden motives, terrifying truths, it's all waiting in this video. But beware, what you learn at the end will change how you see the world forever. Don't look away, the harshest truth from Nietzsche reveals itself only in the finale. Think about it. How often have you heard that women are the embodiment of kindness, softness, moral purity? From childhood, we're fed stories of mothers who sacrifice everything, lovers who inspire, heroines who save the world with their tenderness. These images seep into books, movies, even our own expectations. But Nietzsche looked at this and saw not truth, but a performance. He called these images masks, beautiful, but artificial. In his view, society created them not to elevate women but to simplify them, to make them convenient, predictable. The truth he glimpsed was far more intricate. Women aren't angels or demons. They're human, driven by instincts, desires, and a power that's not always visible but always felt. Picture a theater. On stage stands a woman, bathed in the glow of spotlights. Her movements are graceful, her voice soft, her smile promising warmth. The audience applauds, enchanted, but no one asks, who is she backstage? Nietzsche was the one who peeked behind the curtain. He saw not just the image but what crafted it. He noticed how women, denied the right to direct power, learned to act differently, through influence, through emotions, through a subtle game where they're always a step ahead. This wasn't weakness. It was strategy, forged over centuries when the world told them, "You can't." And Nietzsche, rather than condemning, admired this hidden strength, though he warned, it's dangerous because it's invisible. Why do we fear this truth so much? Why is it easier to believe in myths than to face reality? Society teaches us that truth should be soft, convenient, pleasing. We want stories that warm the heart, not questions that make us think. But Nietzsche wasn't here to comfort. His philosophy is a mirror that shows everything, the beauty, the shadows, the things we hide even from ourselves. He looked at the relationships between men and women and saw not romance, but a battlefield. Not in a crude sense, with shouts and struggles, but in a subtle, almost imperceptible one. It was a game of instincts, where each seeks power, control, survival. And women, in his view, played it better than anyone. Think about your own life. How many times have you mistaken an image for reality? Maybe you saw someone as an ideal, a partner who was supposed to be gentle, understanding, always supportive. Or perhaps you felt resentment when they didn't meet your expectations. Nietzsche said these expectations aren't random. They're part of a grand deception we impose on ourselves. Men, he argued, don't love women. They love the idea they've created of them. This idea makes them feel stronger, more confident, inspired. But it also blinds them. Blinds them to who truly stands before them. Now imagine a woman who knows this. She sees how she's perceived, what roles are thrust upon her. And instead of fighting, she plays along. She becomes what's expected, gentle, virtuous, inspiring. But behind this mask is a mind that calculates every move. Nietzsche called this not deceit, but art. The art of surviving in a world where the direct path to power was barred to women. And this art, in his view, made women not weaker, but stronger. They learned to influence without commanding, to lead without raising their voice, to win without entering the fray. Think about it. When was the last time you felt someone was playing with your expectations? Maybe it was a smile that hid entirely different thoughts. Or words that seemed sincere but left you wondering if you saw the full picture. Nietzsche warned, don't trust what lies on the surface. Behind every mask is intent, behind every gesture a purpose. And women, he said, understood this better than anyone. They knew the world is a stage, and they were actors who could shift the plot without stepping out of character. But here's the twist, Nietzsche didn't just expose. He asked questions that make us squirm. What if all this romance we cherish is just a way to hide fear? Fear of the truth, of complexity, of the fact that women aren't symbols but living beings with their own desires, power, and darkness? He looked at love and saw not harmony, but a deal. Not equality, but a dance where each tries to lead. And in this dance, women, he believed, were masters, because they knew, whoever controls perception controls everything. Think again, when did you last sense someone knew more about you than you let on? Maybe it was a moment when a woman looked at you like she saw right through you. Or said something that stung, but you couldn't pin down why. Nietzsche cautioned, don't be fooled. Women, in his view, weren't victims of men's fantasies. They were co-authors of those fantasies. They knew men sought an ideal and gave it to them. But not out of weakness, out of strength. Because while a man is enamored with an image, he's vulnerable. He's open. He's ready to follow, unaware he's being led. But what if this game isn't all there is? What if, behind the masks, the images, the expectations, there's something greater? Nietzsche didn't stop at exposing. He wanted to understand why we fear the truth so much. Why do men create illusions, and why do women sustain them? And most importantly, what happens when those illusions crumble? When a man sees not an angel, but a person? When a woman stops playing the role the world assigned her? These questions, like sparks, ignite curiosity. They make us wonder, what if the love we hold so dear isn't what it seems? What if it's just a pretty cover for a game we don't even realize we're playing? Love, a word we whisper with reverence. We see it in movies, hear it in songs, chase it in every glance, every touch. But what if everything we call love is just a mirage? What if we fall not for a person, but for a picture we've painted in our minds? Friedrich Nietzsche gazed at this emotion without illusions and saw not harmony, but deception. Not a malicious lie, but a quiet, almost sacred self-deception we embrace to shield ourselves from the truth. He argued that men don't truly love women. They love the idea they've crafted of them. And that idea, like a mirror, reflects not reality, but their own fears, desires, and vulnerabilities. But here's the kicker, women, Nietzsche believed, know this. And instead of shattering the illusion, they nurture it, because in that lies their power. Think back to a time when you fell in love. Maybe it was someone who seemed perfect. Their words, their gestures, their gaze, everything aligned into an image that made your heart race. You saw salvation, inspiration, purpose. But then, over time, something cracked. Maybe they said something that stung. Or acted in a way you didn't expect. Suddenly, the ideal began to crumble, leaving you with a sense of betrayal. Nietzsche looked at those moments and said, the betrayal isn't in them. It's in you. You betrayed yourself by believing in a fantasy. You crafted an angel, then blamed them for being human. Picture an artist standing before a canvas, painting a portrait. Each stroke adds features they long to see, softness, purity, perfection. But this portrait isn't a real person. It's their dream, their refuge. Nietzsche called this idealization, the process where men turn women into symbols. A woman becomes not a person, but an idea, a savior, a muse, a keeper of the hearth. This image makes men feel stronger, more confident, uplifted. But it also makes them fragile. Because when reality pierces through this picture, they don't just feel disappointment, they feel collapse. Collapse of what they believed in. Why do we do this? Why is it easier to fall for myths than to see the person in front of us? Nietzsche called it cowardice. Not blatant, not obvious, but subtle, almost elusive. Men fear complexity. They fear a woman who doesn't fit their mold, who feels, desires, acts without asking permission. And instead of facing that complexity, they craft an image they can control. The woman in this image is always gentle, always understanding, always there. But Nietzsche saw this not as love, but as escape. Escape from a truth that terrifies. A woman isn't your salvation. She's a separate person, with her own instincts, her own will, her own strength. Now imagine a woman standing before this artist. She watches as he paints her portrait. She notices every stroke, every detail that isn't her. And what does she do? She doesn't argue. She doesn't tear down the canvas. She smiles, plays along, becomes what he wants to see. Why? Because she knows, this is her power. Nietzsche said women are masters of the game. They understand that the world judges them by image, not substance. And instead of fighting it, they wield it. They become what's expected, tender, virtuous, inspiring. But behind this mask is a mind that sees everything. A mind that knows how to guide, how to influence, how to win without ever stepping into the ring. Think about it. When was the last time you felt someone knew more about you than you let on? Maybe it was a moment when a woman caught your eye in a way that felt like she saw through you. Or said something that hit hard, but you couldn't quite grasp why. Nietzsche warned, don't be deceived. Women, in his view, aren't victims of men's fantasies. They're co-creators of those fantasies. They know men seek an ideal and offer it up. But not out of weakness, out of strength. Because while a man is captivated by an image, he's exposed. He's open. He's ready to follow, oblivious to being led. But here's what makes this idea even more provocative. Nietzsche didn't judge men or women. He didn't say one was right and the other wrong. He simply showed how the game works. Men craft illusions to feel stronger. Women sustain those illusions to maintain influence. And in this dance, there are no winners or losers, just two people afraid of the truth. Afraid to look at each other without masks, without roles, without expectations. Nietzsche called this a tragedy. Not because love is impossible, but because we make it impossible by clinging to lies. Imagine a moment when an illusion shatters. Maybe it was a day when you saw your loved one not as an angel, but as someone who falters, doubts, acts in their own interest. What did you feel? Disappointment? Anger? Or maybe relief? Nietzsche said these moments aren't the end, but the beginning. The beginning of a path to something greater than fantasy. But that path is daunting. It demands courage. Courage to see not just the other, but yourself. To see how you create myths, how you cling to them, how you fear letting go. Think about it. What would happen if you stopped falling for images? If you looked at the person before you and accepted them as they are, with all their desires, fears, strength? Nietzsche believed it's possible, but not easy. It requires you to stop running from the truth. To stop seeking salvation in ideals. To stop blaming others for not matching your expectations. And most importantly, it requires you to ask, what if women aren't just sustaining this game? What if they're playing it better than you think? What if their strength lies not in being perfect, but in knowing how to use your illusions against you? When you think of power, what comes to mind? Kings leading armies? Politicians delivering fiery speeches? Or maybe CEOs signing million-dollar deals? Friedrich Nietzsche saw power differently. He saw it not just in grand gestures, but in quiet, almost imperceptible movements. And in this realm, women, he believed, were unmatched. Not because they could command or rule openly, the world denied them that for centuries, but because they learned to act with precision, intelligence, and depth. Their power wasn't in shouting, but in whispering. Not in ordering, but in guiding. Nietzsche didn't see women as victims of history. He saw them as strategists who turned their constraints into a weapon capable of shaping destinies. Think of a moment when someone influenced you without raising their voice. Maybe it was a woman, your mother, a friend, a colleague, who, with a single look or word, made you pause, rethink, feel differently. You didn't sense force, but something shifted. Your thoughts, your actions took a new course. Nietzsche called this the art of influence. He believed women, barred from direct power, honed this art to perfection. In a world where men built empires through strength and bold words, women operated differently, through emotions, through an understanding of human nature, through seeing what drives others. Picture a chessboard. Men, Nietzsche suggested, often play like queens, bold, direct, dominating the board. Women, though, move like knights, unpredictable, sidestepping obstacles, appearing where least expected. This isn't about weakness, it's about mastery. For centuries, women were told, you can't lead armies, you can't speak from podiums, you can't shape the world's fate. So they forged another path. They learned to influence those who made decisions. They became the ones who guide without wielding a sword, who earn loyalty without demanding submission. And Nietzsche, rather than judging, looked on with admiration. Why does this power unsettle us? Because it's invisible. A man who shouts or threatens is clear, his power is obvious, challengeable. But a woman who changes the course of events with a single word or gesture remains a mystery. Nietzsche said women understand men better than men understand themselves. They see their desires, their pride, their vulnerabilities. And they use this not out of malice, but out of necessity. In a world where open paths were closed, they crafted their own, through charm, intuition, and the ability to read what's unspoken. This wasn't weakness. It was adaptation, forged through ages. Think about your life. Recall a woman who swayed you without force. Maybe it was a teacher whose praise pushed you to try harder. Or a friend whose seemingly casual advice changed your choice. These moments feel simple, but Nietzsche saw more. He saw a strength that doesn't need titles or stages. A strength that works through connection, through emotions, through a deep grasp of what moves a person. And this strength, he argued, was unique, not better or worse than men's, but different, and no less potent. Now imagine a woman who knows how this game works. She sees how she's perceived, what roles are forced upon her. And instead of resisting, she plays. She becomes what's expected, gentle, caring, uplifting. But behind this image is a mind that calculates every step. Nietzsche said women aren't just players in the game, they're its architects. They know a man enchanted by an image is vulnerable. He opens his heart, his thoughts, his weaknesses. And in that moment, a woman can steer him, not with shouts, not with threats, but with a subtle, almost intangible touch. What makes this idea even more striking, Nietzsche didn't call women deceitful. He didn't accuse them of manipulation. He saw their actions not as lies, but as necessity. In a world that denied women power, they created their own. They mastered what Nietzsche called psychological artistry. They understood what drives men, their ego, their desires, their need for validation. And they used this to survive, to protect themselves, to leave a mark on a world that tried to erase them. This wasn't weakness. It was brilliance. Think again. When did you feel someone understood you better than you expected? Maybe it was a moment when a woman guessed your thoughts, predicted your actions, nudged you without trying. Nietzsche cautioned, don't underestimate this power. It doesn't shout, doesn't demand attention, but it changes everything. A woman who grasps human nature can shift a conversation, alter a mood, even rewrite a story, all without raising her voice. It's unsettling because it's uncontrollable. It's awe-inspiring because it's an art. But Nietzsche didn't stop at admiration. He posed questions that make us uneasy. What if this power isn't just a reaction to the world, but a way of shaping it? What if women aren't just playing by the rules, but crafting them? He looked at their actions and saw not just survival, but creativity. Women, he believed, didn't merely accept the images thrust upon them. They used those images to control perception, to mold reality. And in this, he argued, lay their true power, power over how the world sees them, and thus, over how the world behaves. Picture a gardener. They don't break trees or uproot them. They guide their growth, pruning branches, shaping forms. So too, Nietzsche believed, women acted in a man's world. They didn't fight the system openly, that was too perilous. Instead, they influenced it from within, through delicate, nearly invisible gestures. And those gestures, like drops of water, reshaped everything over time. Nietzsche saw this not as weakness, but as a strength that requires not muscle, but mind, not thunder, but silence. But what if this game isn't just about influence? What if it's about perception, about how women shape not just their actions, but how they're seen? Nietzsche said women know, the world values not reality, but image. And they understood this better than anyone. They knew it's not who you are, but who you seem to be. And in that knowledge lies their strength, their weapon, their art. But how far does this art extend? Could it be that everything we see in women, their beauty, their softness, their virtue, is just part of a grander strategy? In a world ruled by glances, words, and gestures, appearance isn't just decoration, it's a weapon. Think about it. How often do you judge someone by their smile, their poise, their tone? We live in a society where first impressions are everything, where image often trumps substance. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this not as a quirk, but as a game, and women, he believed, were its masters. He didn't dismiss their focus on appearance as shallow or vain. To him, it was an art, the art of shaping perception, the art of surviving in a world that judges by the surface. Women, in his view, didn't just play this game. They refined it, turning beauty, grace, even softness into tools that could alter reality. And in this, he saw not weakness, but genius, a genius that's quiet, not obvious, but as powerful as a shadow outpacing light. Picture a scene. A woman enters a room. Her walk is light, her smile warm, her eyes promising understanding. All eyes turn to her. Some see inspiration, others a mystery, a few find comfort. But no one asks, what does she think? What does she want? Nietzsche said women know, the world doesn't seek truth. It seeks an image, one that soothes, inspires, captivates. And they learn to craft this image, not because they're frail, but because they're sharp. For centuries, they were told, your worth lies in how you're seen. Instead of rejecting this, they seized it, turning it into their strength. They became architects of perception, understanding that whoever controls the image controls the game. Think about your life. Recall a moment when someone's appearance, their demeanor swayed you. Maybe it was a woman whose confidence made you listen closer, or whose gentleness made you open up without thinking. Nietzsche saw these moments not as chance, but as strategy. He argued women understand, people fall for what seems, not what is. Beauty, style, tone, these aren't just details. They're a language women use to speak to the world. And this language, he believed, was their power, letting them influence without claiming authority, guide without force. Why does this matter? Because the world women lived in offered no other path. Nietzsche looked at history and saw how women were denied the stage, leadership, direct influence. They couldn't command armies, write laws, or stand at the helm. But that didn't mean they were powerless. Far from it, they found a way to act where they weren't expected. They learned to use what the world valued in them: appearance, charm, the ability to be proper. and they turned it into a tool that could shift fates. Nietzsche called this not vanity, but mastery, born of necessity. Imagine an artist working not with paint, but with perception. Every gesture, every glance is a brushstroke on a canvas others call reality. Women, Nietzsche believed, were such artists. They knew a man enchanted by their image becomes pliable. He opens his heart, his thoughts, his vulnerabilities. And in that moment, a woman can guide him, not with force, not with demands, but with a subtle, almost ethereal touch. This wasn't deception, but art. The art of creating an illusion that serves them, not works against them. Think again. How many times have you noticed a woman change the mood just by being there? Maybe it was a colleague who diffused a tense argument with one comment. Or a friend whose smile lifted you up, even if she said nothing. Nietzsche saw these not as random acts, but as strength. A strength that works through perception, through the ability to be what's needed in the moment. And this strength, he argued, was unnerving because it couldn't be predicted, couldn't be controlled. It was like water, fluid, soft, yet capable of carving stone. What makes this idea even deeper, Nietzsche didn't say women were lying. He said they understood the world better than it understood itself. They knew people judge by the surface, that image outweighs essence, that perception shapes reality. And instead of fighting this, they harnessed it. They became what the world wanted, beautiful, gentle, uplifting. But behind this image was a mind that saw it all. A mind that knew how to turn a situation to their advantage, how to get what they needed without breaking the rules of the game. Picture a chess game. The opponent thinks they own the board, unaware their pieces are slowly, surely being trapped. Women, Nietzsche believed, played this way. They didn't challenge openly, that was too risky. Instead, they moved subtly through image, through perception, through being what was needed. And in this, he saw their power. Not loud, not blatant, but hidden, like roots holding a tree firm when storms break its branches. Think about it. When did you feel someone's presence shift everything? Maybe it was a woman who sensed your mood and adjusted hers to match. Or who said just the right thing to nudge you forward. Nietzsche warned, don't overlook this power. It doesn't demand attention, but it reshapes everything. A woman who understands how perception works can steer a conversation, change a decision, even alter a narrative, all without seeming to try. It's unsettling because it's subtle. It's remarkable because it's deliberate. But Nietzsche didn't just marvel. He asked questions that make us uneasy. What if this focus on appearance isn't just about survival, but about control? What if women aren't just playing the world's game, but rewriting its rules? He looked at their actions and saw not just reaction, but creation. Women, he believed, didn't merely accept the images forced upon them. They used those images to shape reality, to influence those who thought themselves stronger. And in this, he argued, lay their true power, power over how they're seen, and thus, over how the world acts. But what if this game goes beyond appearance? What if it's not just about beauty, but about virtue, morality, the traits we hold sacred? Nietzsche looked at women and saw that even their gentleness, their selflessness, their kindness weren't just qualities. They were tools, forged for survival, for influence, for making the world see them as they chose. And that raises a question: what if even morality itself is part of a larger strategy, part of an art women have perfected over centuries? When we think of morality, we imagine something pure, untouchable, almost divine. We see a woman who sacrifices for others, who endures, forgives, comforts, and we think, this is true virtue. But Friedrich Nietzsche looked at these qualities and saw not just goodness, but strategy. Not deception, not pretense, but a precise, calculated mechanism built for survival in a world where women were denied direct power for centuries. He argued that women's morality, patience, gentleness, selflessness, wasn't innate holiness, but a tool. A tool they sharpened to earn respect, protection, and influence in a society that handed raw power to men. And in this, he saw not weakness, but brilliance, the ability to turn vulnerability into strength, to weave limitations into a weapon that needs no thunder but changes everything. Think about how we admire female virtue. A mother putting her family first. A friend always ready to listen. A woman who forgives even when it hurts. These images stir warmth, respect, almost reverence. But Nietzsche asked, what if this virtue isn't just the heart's expression? What if it's a response to a world that told women, you must be this to be valued? He looked at history and saw how women were denied strength, voice, authority. Instead of breaking, they found another way. They turned qualities the world deemed weak into tools of influence, crafting an image that made others feel indebted, grateful, even guilty. Picture a fortress. Its walls are impregnable, gates locked, guards alert. But someone doesn't storm the walls or break the gates. They enter quietly, with a smile, a kind word, and the guards open the way. This, Nietzsche believed, is how women operated. They couldn't fight for power openly. It was too dangerous, too inaccessible. So they created an image that disarmed. Patience became their shield, forgiveness their blade, selflessness their crown. These qualities we call morality were, for Nietzsche, not just virtues. They were strategies, allowing women to shape a world that sought to subdue them. Think about your life. Recall a woman whose kindness, whose softness, made you feel better but also, perhaps, obligated. Maybe it was a coworker who helped you through a tough moment, asking nothing in return. Or a relative whose care made you question your own actions. These moments seem simple, but Nietzsche saw more. He said women understand, virtue isn't just a gift, it's a lever. It builds bonds, fosters trust, prompts others to act as needed. And this ability, he argued, was their strength, a strength that whispers, not shouts, that asks yet receives. Why does this matter? Because the world women lived in left them no alternative. Nietzsche saw the 19th century society and how it confined women to roles, be a mother, a wife, an ornament. Their worth was tied not to their minds or wills, but to how they served others. And they embraced this game, but rewrote its rules. They made virtue their power, turning qualities labeled feminine into a means of influence. Patience became a way to endure, forgiveness a way to guide, selflessness a way to secure loyalty. And Nietzsche, rather than condemning, looked on with awe, seeing not weakness, but mastery. Imagine a gardener who doesn't chop trees but shapes their growth. They don't break branches, but prune carefully, crafting a form that seems natural. So, Nietzsche believed, women acted. They didn't fight the system that constrained them, that was too risky. Instead, they worked within it, using virtue as a tool to reshape reality. They knew a man touched by their gentleness becomes open. He feels like a protector, a hero, indebted. And in that moment, a woman can steer him, not by demanding, not by commanding, but by being what he needs to see. Think again. How often have you felt someone's kindness sway you? Maybe it was a moment when someone's care made you rethink your choices. Or their forgiveness made you feel guilty, even if you didn't want to. Nietzsche warned, don't be fooled. This virtue isn't just the heart's outpouring. It's a tool, honed over centuries when women had to find ways to survive in a world where power wasn't theirs. And this skill, he said, was unsettling because it worked quietly, yet irresistibly. What makes this idea even more provocative? Nietzsche didn't accuse women of hypocrisy. He didn't call their virtue a lie. He called it adaptation, born of necessity. In a world that denied women strength, they forged their own, a strength that works through emotions, through perception, through being what's needed. They learned to turn vulnerability into a weapon, making it not a flaw, but an edge. And Nietzsche saw this not as deceit, but as art, the art of survival, of influence, of rewriting the rules in a game where they always started behind. Picture a chess player using white pieces, but with a catch: they can't use the queen. The odds seem slim. But they find a way. Every move, every pawn, every knight becomes part of a plan the opponent doesn't see. This, Nietzsche believed, was how women played. They couldn't use men's rules, that was impossible. So they crafted their own game, where virtue was their strongest move. And this move, he argued, was not just defense, but offense, an offense that leaves no trace, yet changes everything. Think about it. When did someone's virtue feel like more than kindness? Maybe it was a woman whose patience made you rethink your haste, or whose selflessness made you question your priorities. Nietzsche said these moments reveal a power that doesn't need a stage yet shifts the world. Women, he believed, didn't just accept the roles forced upon them. They used those roles to influence, to guide, to create a reality where their voice was heard, even if it spoke softly. And in this, he saw their true strength, a strength that requires no podium, but reshapes everything. But what if this game is changing? What if women no longer need these roles, this virtue, this hidden power? Nietzsche looked at his era and saw the first signs of change, women demanding rights, voice, freedom. And he wondered, what happens when this strength steps out of the shadows? When women stop playing by old rules and start writing their own? This was a question that unnerved him, not because he doubted women, but because he knew a world accustomed to their softness wasn't ready for their directness. The world is shifting. What once seemed unshakable is starting to crack. The rules that defined what a woman should be, how she's seen by society, are slowly but surely crumbling. Friedrich Nietzsche lived in a time when these changes were just beginning, faint voices of women demanding rights, taking first steps toward freedom, challenging a system that kept them in the shadows. He watched not with surprise, but with unease. Not because he feared women, but because he foresaw a storm. He saw the rise of a new woman, independent, direct, needing no approval or protection. And he knew this new figure wouldn't bring harmony. It would spark chaos, conflict, a reimagining of everything we thought was normal. But in that chaos, Nietzsche believed, lay opportunity, an opportunity for a world where illusions give way to truth. Think about your life. Recall a woman who defied expectations. Maybe a colleague who refused to stay silent when everyone expected her to nod. Or a friend who chose ambition over tradition, despite judgment. These women aren't rare today, but in Nietzsche's time, they were outliers, the first sparks promising a blaze. He looked at them and saw not just rebellion, but the birth of a new force. A force that no longer hides behind softness, no longer plays by old rules, no longer seeks shelter in a man's world. This woman, he argued, was not just a threat to men, she was a threat to the entire system built on illusions. Picture a river, confined for centuries by stone banks. Suddenly, the stones crack, and the water surges, carving a new path. This is how Nietzsche saw the changes women brought. In his era, they were still bound by roles, mother, wife, keeper of the hearth. But he noticed some beginning to question, to demand rights, to seek freedom. It wasn't a mass movement, but it was inevitable. He foresaw that a woman, freed from the need to be proper, would become a force of nature, not because she's better or worse, but because she'd stop bending to expectations. Why was this so unsettling? Because the world Nietzsche knew was built on a balance of roles. Men saw themselves as protectors, leaders, rule-makers. Women, even with their hidden strength, operated within those rules, using gentleness, charm, virtue. But what happens when a woman says, "I don't need your protection," when she rejects the role of muse, mother, comforter, and chooses her own path? Nietzsche called this not just change, but an earthquake. Men, raised to feel superior, would face a woman who doesn't need their strength. And this independence, he argued, would spark not admiration, but resentment. Think about it. How often have you seen an independent woman stir debate? Maybe a friend who prioritized her career, ignoring critics. Or a figure in the news demanding equality, met with mockery. Nietzsche predicted this. He said a man, taught to see himself as the guardian, would feel lost when that role is unneeded. His ego, his sense of dominance, would take a hit. And instead of embracing the new reality, he turned to resentment, blame, attempts to restore the old order. This isn't weakness, it's human nature, resisting change. Imagine a forest where ancient trees block sunlight from young shoots. A storm breaks the old trunks, letting light reach the ground. New plants sprout, but the old forest fights, clinging to its roots. This is how Nietzsche saw the clash of old and new. Women breaking free from old roles become those new shoots. They don't just demand equality, they redefine the game. They no longer rely on hidden strength to influence from the shadows. They step into the light, asserting their will, their desires, their independence. And this, Nietzsche believed, threatens not just men, but a society hooked on order, where everyone knows their place. Think again, what happens when a woman refuses to be gentle? When she says no instead of yes? When she chooses herself over others? Today, we see this everywhere. Women building companies, leading movements, setting their own rules. But in Nietzsche's time, this was rare, almost revolutionary. He watched these early steps and saw not just change, but a rupture. A break from a past where women had to act through charm, virtue, image. The new woman, he argued, didn't need those tools. She was ready to speak plainly, act openly, live without glancing at expectations. What makes this idea even richer? Nietzsche didn't celebrate or condemn these shifts. He was an observer, watching old illusions shatter. He said an independent woman isn't just a new player, but a new world. A world where old rules, man protects, woman inspires, stop working. And this world, he believed, would be messy, full of conflict, because people hate when their illusions are broken. Men would feel wounded, women liberated, but both would grapple with confusion, unsure how to navigate a world where roles no longer hold. Picture a bridge collapsing underfoot. People panic, clutching the rails, but the structure keeps cracking. This is how Nietzsche saw the shift to a new world. Women shedding dependence don't just break their roles, they break men's roles too. And this, he argued, won't lead to peace. It'll bring turmoil, questions, pain. But in that pain, he saw potential. Potential to rethink what it means to be a man, a woman, a human. It won't be easy, but it'll be real. Think about it. How would you feel if every role you knew vanished? If a woman you knew refused to play by old rules? If she looked you in the eye and said, "I'm not your muse, not your savior, I'm me." Nietzsche said these moments aren't endings, but beginnings. Beginnings of a path to a new reality, where illusions yield to honesty. But that honesty is daunting. It demands we let go of what we thought was true. Let go of the idea that men must be stronger, women softer. Let go of a game where everyone hides behind a mask. But what if this chaos isn't destruction, but creation? What if the new woman Nietzsche saw isn't a threat but a chance? A chance to build relationships with no saviors or victims, where people meet not as roles, but as equals? He looked at these changes and saw not just conflict, but hope. Hope for a world where truth matters more than illusions, where strength is measured not by power, but by honesty. But how do we reach that world? How do we weather the storm the new woman brings and find not fear, but possibility? The storm of change Nietzsche foresaw doesn't promise calm. It brings questions, doubts, a need to face ourselves and others without the masks we've grown used to. But what if, within this chaos, there's not destruction, but opportunity? An opportunity to forge relationships free of saviors or victims, free of roles we play out of fear or habit. Friedrich Nietzsche envisioned a world where men and women could meet not as rivals in a game of power, not as creators or keepers of illusions, but as equals, equal not in every way, but in their strength, their vulnerability, their right to be human. This wasn't a romantic fantasy, but a challenge. A challenge to shed old rules, let go of grudges, and release the urge to control. And this challenge, Nietzsche believed, begins with honesty, with the courage to see another as they are and accept yourself without lies. Think about your relationships. Recall a moment when you felt you were playing a role. Maybe you tried to seem stronger than you were to meet expectations. Or stayed silent when you wanted to speak, just to keep the peace. We all do this, men, women, everyone. Nietzsche saw these roles not as freedom, but as cages. He argued that relationships between men and women are often built on illusions. Men want to be protectors, women inspirers, and both hide behind these masks, afraid to show their true selves. But what if we stopped hiding? What if we met not as images, but as people, with all our fears, desires, and strength? Picture two dancers moving across a stage. Each tries to lead, each fears a misstep. Their movements are graceful, but tense, because they don't trust each other. Now imagine they pause, lock eyes, and start again, not for the audience, not by the rules, but because they choose to. This is how Nietzsche saw the potential for new relationships. Not perfect, not free of conflict, but honest. Relationships where men don't seek salvation in women, and women don't wield charm to guide. Where both reject the game and choose truth, even if it's unsettling. Why is this so hard? Because truth demands vulnerability. Men, Nietzsche said, must release their resentment toward women who no longer need their protection, who choose themselves over a man's ego. Women must let go of the habit of influencing from the shadows, of roles that gave them power but stole their freedom. This doesn't mean becoming the same. Nietzsche didn't believe in literal equality. He knew men and women differ, with distinct instincts, distinct ways of seeing the world. But he believed in equality and strength, that both can be honest, both can be powerful, both can be human, not just an image. Think about it. When were you last truly honest in a relationship? Not just sharing facts or plans, but revealing yourself, your fears, your doubts, your desires. Maybe it was a moment when you admitted a weakness, expecting judgment, but found understanding. Or when you said, no, risking conflict, but felt free. Nietzsche said these moments are rare, but they're the start. The start of a path to relationships where there's no need to pretend, where strength isn't about who shouts loudest, but who dares to be real. Imagine a bridge between two shores. On one stands a man, on the other a woman. They look at each other, but fear taking a step. The bridge is shaky, built of expectations, roles, illusions. To meet, they must tear it down and build anew, with truth, with trust, with the courage to see each other unmasked. Nietzsche believed this is possible, but not for everyone. Only for those willing to abandon familiar comfort, the urge to control, the fear of being exposed. This isn't romance, not a fairy tale of endless love. It's work on yourself, your grudges, your illusions. Think again, what holds you back? Maybe it's fear that without roles you'll lose yourself. Or resentment toward those who didn't meet your expectations. Or the habit of playing by old rules because they're familiar. Nietzsche said these feelings aren't enemies, but teachers. They show where you're not yet free, where you still cling to illusions. And he urged not to fight them, but to face them. Ask, what are you teaching me? A man who lets go of resentment toward a woman who isn't his muse grows stronger. A woman who sheds the role of comforter grows freer. And in this, Nietzsche saw a new kind of strength, the strength to be yourself. Picture a conversation. Not one where you argue or prove a point, but where you speak truth. Where a man admits, I was afraid you wouldn't need me. Where a woman replies, I was afraid you wouldn't see me without my softness. In this exchange, there's no winner or loser, no roles or masks. Just two people who chose to be real. Nietzsche said these moments are rare, but they change everything. They forge a bond stronger than romance, because it's rooted not in illusions, but in truth. Think about it, what would happen if you stopped playing roles? If you looked at the person beside you and saw not an image, but their essence? It might be frightening. It might spark conflict. But Nietzsche believed these moments birth true strength. A strength that doesn't need one to be stronger or weaker, to save or be saved. A strength that lets two people meet as equals, not in sameness, but in respect for what each brings. What makes this idea even deeper, Nietzsche didn't promise an easy path. He knew most would choose comfort, clinging to old roles, grudges, illusions. Men would keep seeking salvation in women, women would keep using gentleness to guide. And that's not wrong, it's human. But Nietzsche saw a path for those willing to go further. For those unafraid of conflict, unafraid of truth, unafraid of themselves. These people, he believed, would build a new world, a world where relationships rest not on lies, but on shared strength. Imagine a field after a battle. The ground is scarred, but new shoots push through. This is how Nietzsche saw the future of relationships. Old illusions, man as protector, woman as muse, will fall. But in their place, something new will grow. Not harmony, not perfection, but truth. A truth that scares but frees. A truth that demands effort, but offers freedom. And that freedom, Nietzsche believed, starts not with another, but with you. With your willingness to shed roles, grudges, the need to control. But how do you take that first step? How do you find the courage to face yourself and another without masks? Nietzsche offered no simple answers, but he left us a mirror. A mirror that reflects not just our illusions, but our strength. The strength to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be you. And that mirror isn't the end of the path, but its beginning. The beginning of relationships with no saviors or victims, just two people ready to meet as equals. But what does it take to make that leap? What does it take to embrace the truth Nietzsche laid bare? Truth isn't a gentle glow that warms the soul. It's a piercing beam that cuts, exposes, forces you to see what you've learned to hide. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't come to soothe us with tales of love or harmony. He came to place us before a mirror, one that reveals not just our illusions, but our strength. He looked at the relationships between men and women and saw not romance, but a game of masks, roles, and expectations. Yet he also saw way beyond this game, toward something greater, toward honesty that frightens but frees. And this path to truth, he believed, starts not with someone else, but with you. With your willingness to face yourself, your fears, your illusions, and ask, what am I hiding? What am I afraid to see? And most crucially, what can I do to become freer? Think about a moment when you felt you weren't living your own life. Maybe it was a day you went along with something you didn't want, just to please others. Or a time you stayed quiet when everything inside screamed to speak. We all play roles, men, women, all of us. We wear masks to be accepted, to feel safe, to fit what's expected. But Nietzsche said these masks aren't who we are. They're chains we place on ourselves. And freedom begins when we choose to remove them, even if it's terrifying, even if it hurts, even if the world isn't ready for our truth. Picture a house filled with mirrors. Each reflects you differently. In one, you're a hero, in another, a victim, in a third, the person you fear becoming. You move between them, choosing which reflection feels closest. But there's one mirror, tucked in a corner, covered in dust. It doesn't flatter, doesn't distort, doesn't embellish. It shows you as you are. Nietzsche was the one pointing to that mirror. He said the truth about ourselves lies not in the roles we play, but in what we conceal. Men hide their fear of being unneeded, women their desire to be heard without the mask of virtue. And as long as we fear this mirror, we stay in a game where no one wins. Think again, what are you hiding? Maybe it's resentment towards someone who didn't meet your expectations. Or fear that without roles you'll lose yourself. Or a longing to be more than the world allows. Nietzsche said these feelings aren't foes. They're signposts, showing where you're not yet free. He urged not to run from them, but to face them. Ask, what are you teaching me? Why are you here? And in that question, the path to truth begins, a truth that offers no comfort, but grants strength. The strength to be yourself, not an image others approve. Imagine a river. It flows, weaving around rocks, finding a way even where none seems possible. This is how Nietzsche saw the journey to honesty. It's not a loud feat, not a sudden revelation. It's quiet, daily work. Work to notice your illusions, your fears, your habits of hiding. For a man, it might be admitting, "I was afraid you wouldn't need me." For a woman, saying, "I'm tired of being gentle to be loved." These words aren't weakness. They're power, because they demand courage. Courage to be vulnerable, courage to be real. Think about it. When did you last speak a truth that scared you? Maybe it was a conversation where you shared your doubts. Or a moment when you refused a role you played for years. These moments are rare, but they shift everything. Nietzsche said truth isn't the end of the path, but its start. The start of a life where you don't fear yourself, don't fear another, don't fear the world. But this path demands resolve to shed old habits, the need to control, the illusions that offer false comfort. Picture a fire. It burns brightly, but darkness surrounds it. You can stay in the shadows, where it's safe, where no one sees your flaws. Or you can step toward the flame, where light reveals everything, your strengths, your scars. Nietzsche called us to that fire. He said relationships between men and women can be more than a game of roles. They can be a meeting of two people unafraid of the light. But this requires letting go of resentment, of fear, of the need to be right. A man must release the notion he must be stronger. A woman must shed the idea she must be softer. And both must embrace honesty, even when it stings. Think again, what would happen if you stopped hiding? If you looked at the person beside you and said, "I want to know you, not the image you show me." It might spark an argument. It might open old wounds. But Nietzsche believed these moments forge a connection deeper than romance. A connection not built on illusions, but on truth. A connection that doesn't need saviors or victims, but allows you to be human, with all your strengths, weaknesses, desires. What makes this idea even profounder? Nietzsche didn't say this path is for everyone. He knew most would choose the shadows, clinging to familiar roles, grudges, illusions. Men would keep seeking salvation in women. Women would keep using softness to guide. And that's not wrong, it's a choice. But Nietzsche saw a path for those ready to go beyond. For those unafraid of the fire, unafraid of truth, unafraid of themselves. These people, he believed, would create a new world, a world where relationships rest not on lies, but on strength shared between two. Imagine a dawn. Darkness fades, and the world opens in new light. This is how Nietzsche saw the future for those who choose truth. It's not a perfect world, not free of pain or conflict. But it's a world where you're free to be yourself, free to see another, free to build relationships unbound by roles. And this freedom starts with a simple step, looking into the mirror Nietzsche left us. Asking yourself, what am I hiding? What am I afraid of? And what can I do right now to be truer? Think about it, what will you do today? Maybe it's a conversation where you speak a truth, even if it scares you. Or a moment where you reject a role you've played for years. Or just a quiet minute where you ask, who do I want to be? Nietzsche didn't promise an easy path. But he promised it would be yours. A path where you're not a victim, not a savior, not an image, but a person, strong, vulnerable, real. And that path, he believed, is worth walking. So take a step. One small step. And see where it leads.